Good morning, everybody. Aloha. Welcome to the Seed Informal Talk Story. This morning we're going to talk about food insecurity, sustainable agriculture, and the environmental and health impacts of biotechnology. And I'm very excited to be here this morning. As many of you know, session will be opening tomorrow, so everybody here is getting ready for some good policy discussions, and I think this morning we're starting it off on the right foot. I'd like to introduce the folks at the table here. First of all, on my left is Representative Lauren Cheap, and then we'll go on my right, Paul Achitoff, who is an attorney with Earth Justice, and he has filed some lawsuits relating to GMO, and I think. Also with us is Andy Kimbrell from the Center for Food Safety, and he's done a lot of work on policy. He worked on Prop 37 in California, and so we'll be real interested in hearing about his input. And we also have Nancy Redfeather from the Hawaii Island School Garden Network, and she is also working with the Hawaii Public Seed Initiative. And we also have Mercy Riddy, and I will look forward to hearing from you. I don't know enough about your background, but I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And last of all, I would like to thank and introduce Walter Riddy, who has been very active on these issues and is going to educate us. And I look forward to working with him this upcoming session. And I'm going to leave it to him to tell a little bit more about today.
All right, thank you. The issue we're talking about today is going to be GMOs, and we've been having a very long discussion about GMOs in Hawaii, and it's a really good reason why we're having this discussion is because the impact of GMOs in Hawaii is growing and growing and growing. We have 5 major international companies that have decided that Hawaii is going to be a base for these companies. So for us to ignore this is not going to be a good idea because these companies are having impact in Hawaii. So the problem we've been having all of these years has been getting really good information about what is really going on. And I remember the first time we tried to talk to politics, and that was on Maui. And the response I got from Maui was, "Are you expecting us to listen to a bunch of howlies?" That's what's the response I got, because the lead that was coming out of all of this was hippie-looking people talking about GMOs, and nobody knew what they were talking about. Nobody had any ideas. So the response just floored me. So we got involved, and we started to get more and more involved, and we tried to get Hawaiians involved in all of this because they decided that GMOs was going to be something they were going to do to our taro. And that opened up all of the eyes locally, because now we're talking about something that we're very dear and close to. So after all of these years, the attitude about the politicians about GMOs being something that is coming from the outside, and the people that are talking had no credibility whatsoever. We couldn't even get hearings at this building. We tried last year, totally closed out. So the credibility was something very important that we had to overcome. So we worked for this entire year to bring the best possible people to Hawaii that has credibility on this issue, to be talking to our politicians so we could have very good information about what this issue is and what the impacts are on Hawaii and what the impacts are nationally and what the impacts are internationally. So we're going to find out today. We have very good information. We have information coming from the very grassroots level. Mercy is here to talk to you as a housewife that lives right next door to all of the action. On the island of Molokai, the largest employer on the island of Molokai, the largest employer is Monsanto. And what is that impact on that island, and what is the impact on the people living right next to these farms? That's a very important story that needs to be told so that our politicians can make good decisions. And if we go to the very other end of the spectrum, nationally, Mr. Andrew Kimbrell has some of the best information nationally that's going on regarding GMOs in all of the United States. Paul Achitoff, he's been involved nationally and at home in all kinds of issues when it comes to the environment and also because of GMOs. Nancy Redfeather, she's the one who dragged us into the Big Island and provided all kinds of leadership, teaching us all about GMOs and all kinds of impacts that we could not really understand. There's a lot of big words when we start talking about the science of all of this. Lots of big words about the impacts to our health, what kinds of impacts. And she's been keeping us abreast as to what is going on internationally. Okay. I know Mercy's really nervous. It's the first time she's ever done anything like this. But I think we should start off at the grassroots level and then build ourselves up into a national level. And after we do that, we need for especially our representatives to ask the hard questions in order for us to get to the root of these issues. So I think I'd like to ask if Mercy would start off and explain, as a person who is grassroots, has never been involved in this kind of stuff before, and share a few words with us, and we'll begin to give information out.
Aloha. My name is Mercy, and I'm 29 years old. I'm part Hawaiian. I've lived on Molokai for nearly all my life. I'm also a wife and a mother. I have my 2 children here, my 1-year-old son and my 10-year-old daughter, as well as my husband. And about actually exactly 1 year today, excuse me, let me go back. We live on Molokai in Ho'olehua, and for those of you who are not familiar with where Ho'olehua is, it's located in the central area, northern part of Molokai. And about 1 year today, January 15th, 2012, Ho'olehua was hit with a pretty bad dust storm coming from Monsanto's fields. And it was both machine and wind generated. And during this time, the wind direction changed. We got some Kona winds that were coming from the southeastern direction. So all of that dust came flowing, drifting right into our home area. And shortly after, our son, who was 6 months at that time, developed a really, really bad cough. It was so bad, and I've never heard a cough like the one he had, and it was so bad that we had to take him to the emergency room. So I would say from that incident, when I saw that our family was directly affected by living near these fields, I decided to get involved and to start researching about, to research these companies and to find out what it was that they were doing on our island. And since that dust storm, we've had several more. On November 2nd of last year, 2012, December 2nd, and also December 20th. And each of these dust storms, I filed a complaint to the Department of Health and their Clean Air branch. I submitted documentation of these dust storms also to the USDA. And I've also contacted Monsanto directly. I wanted to know, what it was that they were spraying, when were they spraying, and in what fields. And I was really concerned about the chemicals, because it's, we see the dust, but it's the invisible pesticides and herbicides that we don't see that are, what we should be really more worried about and concerned for. So basically, after contacting those agencies, I didn't get any answers. No, they really didn't have any answers. Everyone was in the dark about the chemicals. And Monsanto as well, the response I got was, it's safe. and we don't need to worry about it. But I wasn't going to just take their word for it. And so let's see, what else? So basically, at this point, I'm hoping and I'm really pushing for laws, to be in place for so that this information will become public. I feel that residents and schools that are in the area need to know what it is that's going into the air and being released into the our atmosphere. Really, I just just to kind of wrap things up, I just really wanted to share this story because I am speaking to you as a mother, very concerned mother, and I just, I'm really concerned for the safety of our family, and I would hope that, and really pray that there's change. There needs to be change, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mercy. Go ahead, Walter.
Yeah. Can we save the questions to last, and then? So I'd like to jump from the base, way on the bottom, the impacts on the people that are actually living there, and go up to the national level, and see what's happening up at the national level. And I'd like to introduce Mr. Kimbrell.
I thought maybe I would just give a slight overview because there's so much misconception about this particular technology that I thought maybe an overview might be helpful, a very brief overview. Which is we've always, we've heard from the media and certainly heard, I'm sure, in the halls here in this legislature about genetically engineered agriculture feeding the world, genetically engineered agriculture being a cure for global warming, that the blind will see, the lame shall walk, and that there will be miracles that we can't even imagine from biotechnology. That's all very good and it's very effective science fiction. Let's talk about what this technology actually is, and relating directly to what Mercy said, So let's go from science fiction to science fact. 85% of all the GE crops that are planted in the United States and around the world are designed to be herbicide tolerant. What that rather confusing phrase means is that you can spray any amount of weed killer on them and they will not die. Normally, as anybody here knows, if you spray weed killer, whether it be Roundup or others, on not just the weeds, but the flowers of the crops, everything dies. But through a little trick they did with some bacteria, here you can have soy, you can have corn, you can aerial spray it with weed killer, with herbicides, and it kills the weeds, doesn't kill these plants. So these plants are immune from the herbicide. That's 85% of all the crops out there. The other 14% is something called BT. They take a bacteria, they put it in the plant, and that bacteria is supposed to kill insects. And we'll talk about that in a second. But let's go back to herbicide tolerance. Monsanto's been the #1. Their herbicide is named Roundup. That's right, Roundup Ready is the name for their crops. That, again, is a huge percentage of the crops both here and around the world. And every year, 115 million more pounds of Roundup are poured on our crops in the United States because of these herbicide-tolerant crops. Very convenient for large farmers, no doubt about it. They can aerial spray their crops. They don't have to be careful with their weed killer use. They used to have to be pretty careful just to kill the weeds and not to kill the crops. Now aerial spray and that's just fine. And that means 115 million more pounds of Roundup, which is very profitable for Monsanto. Exactly, it works for them. They sell the seeds, they sell the herbicides. A problem has begun to develop though. Biotechnology sort of met Charles Darwin. What has happened is that weeds over the last 13 years now have been so inundated with Roundup that they have developed resistance to Roundup themselves. These are Roundup resistant weeds. Sometimes they're called super weeds. So this is very similar to the crisis we currently experience in antibiotics. There's so much use of antibiotics that we now know that a lot of antibiotics no longer work on the bugs that they're supposed to kill because the bugs evolved. Same thing with the weeds. There's been so much weed killers sprayed on these, Roundup sprayed on these weeds, Roundup doesn't kill them anymore. Super weeds. So what is the answer? And this directly relates to what Mercy was saying. The answer they have is, instead of saying this technology should go back to the drawing board because it didn't take simple adaptation biology into account, they've said, no, we need to go to more and more dangerous herbicides to kill the weeds. So right now, the USDA is in the last stages of approving 2,4-D resistant crops. 2,4-D was an element in Agent Orange. And this is a Dow chemical product. And they're saying, since Roundup won't kill these weeds anymore, we've got to go back in history and find a more dangerous weed killer, and that's 2,4-D. We call them Agent Orange crops. So here now you can spray millions and millions of pounds of 2,4-D, this very dangerous herbicide, as a substitute for Roundup. Now Monsanto got concerned that Dow was going to take over its market. So it is in the stages of approval at USDA of dicamba-resistant corn and soy. Dicamba is even more dangerous than 2,4-D. And as with 2,4-D, it has a nasty element to it. It can, a word that's called, complicated word, volatilize. What that means is that when you spray the dicamba and 2,4-D on your crops, under warm and rainy conditions, they go back up into a cloud and they can move miles, where they will then come down, let's say on your organic farm, and kill everything there. Because that's what they do. They're weed killers. They kill everything. They kill all the crops. So we even have some major conventional farmers that are opposing this. So we are currently 85%, when people speak of genetic engineering, oh, there is no genetically engineered crops that are more yield. There is no genetically engineered crops that use water better. There are no genetically engineered crops that will help the blind see. All of that is not happening. What is happening, is what I'm telling you, is a chemical arms race between Monsanto, Dow, and then Monsanto again, going backwards with these weed killers. So according to Dave Mortensen, a distinguished professor, a weed specialist at Pennsylvania University, and he has published this in a peer-reviewed science study, if we don't stop this within 7 years, there will be 800 million pounds, additional pounds, of Roundup, 2,4-D, and dicamba poured on American crops every year. 800 million additional pounds. By contrast, organic farming in the United States has eliminated about 40 million pounds of pesticides right now. So that means every year, while organic is eliminating, which we certainly approve of, 40 million pounds, this new technology it will be adding 800 million pounds. So this is, this technology is not about saving Africa. It's not about helping folks. This technology is about chemical companies selling their chemicals. And the tragedy is that it's planned obsolescence. What's going to happen is, just like the weeds, Darwin won't quit here. Evolution won't quit. Just like these weeds are now resistant to Roundup, they eventually will get resistant to 2,4-D, and they'll eventually be resistant to dicamba. 10 years from now is what's predicted. And we don't have any other herbicides. That's it. So we're going to have hundreds of millions of acres of weeds that we don't know how to kill. They'll have made a huge amount of profit on these millions of pounds of chemicals they're selling in their seeds. But we, the public, will be left with weeds that we cannot kill. Even a report by the General Accounting Office, USDA, said this could be one of the greatest crises in the history of American agriculture. So behind the veneer, we need to know what they're really doing. So when you wonder what's in the dust, Mercy, we know what's in the dust. We know what they're doing. We need more transparency. We know they are trying to experiment with every known herbicide they can to see what they can do to sort of squeeze out as many years as they can of this technology to see what herbicide, what variety of 2,4-D, what kind of dicamba. If we change the dicamba chemically a little bit, what will happen? Then that gets sprayed. Can we change the 2,4-D, this Agent Orange thing, a little bit? We'll see what that happens. That's what they're experimenting this. We know this through our litigations. That's what they're working on. So that really is the picture. And unfortunately, the USDA right now has taken a position of not blocking a 2,4-D or dicamba-resistant crops. Right now, and we're in court with this excellent, I'm a lawyer, and Paul Ashtoff here, and our legal teams are working to stop these crops and to stop this, and to make USDA truly become a responsible regulator. We have several cases going. We don't know what the results of them will be. But right now, hopefully we'll win. But right now, the situation is the USDA is basically saying we don't have any basis for halting these crops. We don't have the regulatory authority. So this terrible chemical arms race will be happening, and Hawaii will be ground zero for testing this witch's brew of pesticides and herbicides as they try and continually develop these herbicide-tolerant plants. And again, that's 85% of all the genetically engineered crops we have. So when you're talking with people here in the legislature, you can say, let's agree to disagree on the future of biotechnology in agriculture. Maybe it can produce something someday that will be worthwhile. But right now, we know what's happening. There's no secret. This is about these chemical companies using this technology to sell their chemicals and to further pollute and contaminate our organic and conventional farms. And I do not think that's in the public interest, and I certainly don't think Hawaii being ground zero for these experiments is in the interest of Hawaii. Thank you.
Right now, I don't know if everybody's really understands your role, because last year we tried to come here and we couldn't even get up the stairs. I mean, we were like totally shut out. And this year we're sitting in this room and we're having a really good discussion about an issue that we wanted to discuss. And I was wondering if you could explain who you are. And I don't know if the house is organized yet or anything like that, but tomorrow, okay, can you give us a scoop maybe from today? Well, what we're hoping for is, every time we tried something, we got killed in the Ag Committee. And I mean full-on killed. So maybe you can explain how this huge transition from being outside the door, hitting on the door, trying to say something and nobody wants to hear, to actually being invited inside the room and actually having a really good discussion about these issues. Can you just kind of like...
Actually, as I understand it, you did all the work and invited me this morning. But I really appreciate you doing that, and I'm happy to be here. In terms of the House, we'll know a lot more tomorrow, opening day. I'm looking forward to it. We have had a shift, I think, in leadership, and hopefully opening of discussion and transparency. So I am hoping to head up the Agricultural Committee, and I'm looking forward to it because I think there are a lot of discussions that have not happened for a few years, and I think it's high time. So I really appreciate you making the effort, and I also just want to recognize and thank Governor Waihe'e for being here. It's really good to see you. And yeah. And of course, Senator He, mahalo.
That brings us to the next speaker. We worked really hard, and we're going to try not only to have talking going on, but we're actually going to try and get a bill passed this year. And we have a good feeling that we can get a bill passed this year. And I'd like to introduce Paul Achitoff to explain a little bit about our efforts and what this bill is all about.
Thank you, Walter. Aloha. I'm Paul Achitoff. I'm an attorney with Earth Justice. And I've been working on issues relating to this subject for about the last 10 or 11 years. And I wanted to say, just make one comment about what Andy was saying, because I disagree with him about one thing he said, and only one. He said, there's no secret. I disagree. I think that the industry that he's describing is thriving precisely because of efforts to maintain secrecy on a number of different levels. And I got the first lawsuit that I did involving genetic engineering about 10 years ago. It involved crops genetically engineered and being field tested in Hawaii, and they had been engineered to produce pharmaceuticals, drugs, in the plants themselves. And these were very potent proteins that were being grown in corn in open fields around all of the islands. And no compliance with environmental laws had been done. These fields were in unmarked locations where if a person wandered by, they would have no way of knowing what was growing there or the nature of it. The corn looked like any other corn. And we sued the USDA and saying, you know, you shouldn't have allowed this without requiring compliance with environmental laws. And ultimately, we did win that lawsuit. But we had a huge fight with USDA over being allowed ourselves, even me as the attorney, to know the locations of these field trials. It took us a year of litigation, and we finally went into court and asked the judge to hold the government in contempt unless they told us the locations of these field trials, and they finally did, but required that there be a protective order that precluded me from telling anybody outside of court where these locations were. That meant that I could not tell my clients, I could not tell legislators, I could not tell anybody, and that protective order continues to this day. And that really wasn't the government that insisted upon this, really. It was the companies that were doing the work. They insisted on this secrecy. Their view was, oh, we're concerned about maybe people will damage our crops. So what's our solution? We won't label, we won't tell anybody where those crops are. So their approach is, rather than invest in security, they're going to keep everybody in the dark. That has been their approach, in my view, to all aspects of this industry. I get questions constantly of people coming to me and saying, you know, I bought this tomato the other day and I don't know whether it's genetically engineered. Well, the fact is there aren't any genetically engineered tomatoes on the market, but people don't know what is and is not genetically engineered because of the fact that every time legislation has been proposed to label it as genetically engineered, the industries pour tens of millions of dollars into efforts to defeat it. This is what happened with Prop 37 in California just a few months ago. Monsanto and the other companies spent tens of millions of dollars trying to persuade people that labeling these products so that people would simply know what they were buying, what they were feeding their family, was going to cost so much money and add so much to everybody's grocery bill that it was a terrible idea. And it was narrowly defeated, 51% to 49%. Although many of the people who actually voted against it said later that they were in favor of mandatory labeling of these products, but they simply had concerns about the way the bill was drafted. So we have drafted a bill that we're going to introduce relating to labeling of genetically engineered fruits and vegetables that are grown in Hawaii for consumption in Hawaii. This is about the most narrowly crafted labeling bill that can be imagined. Far more narrow, far less burdensome than what was proposed in Prop 37 in California, and more narrow than the legislation that is being proposed in 15 states around the country. I'm totally convinced that within a very few years, 2 or 3 years, labeling is going to be required in some jurisdictions. I will take money on that. And I think Hawaii has the opportunity to, instead of being dragged kicking and screaming along with others, to take the lead here on what is actually a very modest proposal that simply says, if you are growing fresh fruits and vegetables, not talking about processed food, we're not talking about the box that cornflakes come in from the mainland. We're saying if you grow fresh fruits and vegetables in Hawaii that are genetically engineered, you must label it. If it's grown, it doesn't apply to restaurants. It doesn't apply to exports. It doesn't apply to imports. It only applies to fresh fruits and vegetables grown here for local consumption. We export papayas to Japan now. After a long battle, the local papaya industry now gets to export genetically engineered papayas to Japan. But it's labeled, so people in Japan know what they are buying. But there is so much resistance to allowing our citizens here to have that same right. That's what this bill says, is if you go into a store and you want to buy a papaya, you have a right to know whether or not it's genetically engineered. That's all. No one's passing judgment on it. No one's saying anything about it other than it's genetically engineered. If you think that's just fine, you have no issues with that, fine, you can buy it. If you prefer not to, you have that right. And so that's what this bill says. The burdens on farmers, on everybody, have been minimized to the point where all you really need to do is, if you are a grower, put a sticker on it. Everyone who's bought fruits and vegetables in the supermarket knows that they have stickers on them for various reasons. Some of those stickers are voluntary. We have many farmers in Hawaii who voluntarily go out and buy stickers that say Island Fresh or Hawaii grown, because they feel that this is in their interest to do so. I don't know precisely what the cost of that sticker is, but I have a feeling that we're talking about a penny or two. That's it. That's what we're asking. If you are a retailer, you have a right to rely, under this bill, you would have a right to rely on the sworn statements of the growers who supply you that they are not using genetically engineered, not selling you genetically engineered fruits and vegetables, so that if you are the market and the consumer and it turns out that there is a problem, you as the retailer are not responsible. You can say, I have an affidavit here. My grower told me it wasn't genetically engineered. So it's not your responsibility, but it is the responsibility of the grower. The bill would not apply to animal products. The bill does not apply to timber. The bill is, as I say, as narrowly crafted as can be imagined. And so we just want transparency. We want information. We're not saying to ban anything. We're not asking any judgments to be made. But polls around the country have consistently shown, year after year, that about 90% of the respondents to these polls would prefer that genetically engineered foods be labeled. So it's not a close call. The resistance is coming, we understand, from companies like Monsanto or Syngenta that feel like any information on this subject can only hurt them. Even though they say, gee, these are, I don't know why people don't love our genetically engineered crops, that we're saving the world. Well, if it's so great, put out your information, let the market decide. But don't try and put one over on everybody and say, trust us, what's good for Monsanto is good for you. So we're not going to tell you what you're eating, which is currently the situation. I think that summarizes what I have to say about this bill, and if anyone has questions about it, we can address those later. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Paul. I cannot resist. I got to tell you about this secrecy stuff that Paul talked about and disagreed, and I also disagree. On Molokai, I dare any of you to try and come as a developer on the island of Molokai and sneak on the island and do a development without anybody knowing on Molokai. I dare you. Because it's almost next to impossible, because everybody knows everybody. And when you come off the airplane and you're a stranger, the word goes out. And we know who's coming, what agencies are coming, we know. The only organization or corporation that has ever been able to come to Molokai and sneak on our island has been Monsanto. The only one. So I really agree. The ability, how did this company take over and become the largest employer on our island, and we had nothing to say? We didn't even know they were there. They were there like 4, maybe 5 years before anybody even knew they were there. So that's how good these guys are, okay? We had all kinds of developers come to Molokai, and nobody has been able to sneak there except these guys. So I agree about this ability to do that. I also really support this idea about giving the power, taking the power away from the legislators and giving it to the people. We want to have the power to say yay or nay about what we eat, which means we have the power over Monsanto. The power of the fork, goes from the power from the legislature to us, and we vote with the fork. If we don't like what they're growing because of what happens to our kids and what they eat, we can vote with our fork. If we don't like the way that they're farming on our lands and the impacts that those farms have on our children and on the land and on our ocean like it's having on Molokai, we have the power of the fork. So this modest bill, I had a hard time supporting it because it was like, oh, it's really too modest, you know. But our kupuna said, "Ho'omanawa nui," be patient, and that's what this bill represents, a very patient effort to try and gain control back to the people over these monster corporations that are in Hawaii today. I couldn't resist. I had to say something.
Walter, I can't resist saying,
Okay.
what I obviously meant was, we as a litigator and working with Paul, we understand that what they do is not transparent, exactly as Mercy was saying, and it's very dangerous. What is no secret is why they're doing it.
Right on.
They're trying to sell their chemicals. They're chemical companies selling chemicals, and the more we understand that, you know, they're not there to save the world. There's no secret they're trying to sell more chemicals. So that's what I meant by there's no secret.
Okay, we just use you to springboard our stuff. Okay, so now I want to introduce a person that has been giving me an education all these years. I can't turn on my Facebook, not my Facebook, my email. See, I'm really hip. I do Facebook besides email. But my email, without getting something from Nancy Redfeather. I mean, she constantly tells me what's going on all over the place about these chemical companies and about Monsanto and everybody else. So I'd like to introduce Nancy, who's been around in Hawaii a long time, and she's well respected for the information that she has regarding this issue. So Nancy.
Thank you, Walter. Governor, Senator He, Senator Rederman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'd like to just bring a little bit different perspective to this issue that we're talking about. And that is because I have the privilege of working with school gardens across Hawaii Island and with school gardens across the state. You know, many of you may not know, but we just finished a 2012 statewide baseline survey of 300 schools across Hawaii Island. And as it turns out, 168 of them now have school garden programs. This is something that is growing from the grassroots. And the reason that it's happening is because people are concerned about children's health today. If you may not know, but children today are experiencing diseases that were only seen in adults. Type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and so on. And these diseases are being seen in our children down as young as 5 years old. And so all of this data that I'm speaking about has come from Kaiser Permanente and from the CDC. And it is all available if you go online and you watch a movie called Weight of the Nation that was put out by the Surgeon General and the CDC. So I think, you know, one of the real concerns in the issue that we're talking about today is our children's health. And Mercy and I have talked about this before, but you know, one of the problems with children's health today, and one of the reasons that the children are experiencing such problems, is because of processed foods. And a lot of these processed foods contain corn and soy. And this is something to be concerned about. So across the state, what I see is people are wanting to reconnect children with the land, with the source of their health, which is whole foods grown organically, and to work to create a real farm-to-school and school garden program in the state of Hawaii. There are 33 states in the United States that have official farm-to-school school garden programs. We are one of the states that has not yet embraced this. Yet it is It is a program that could work to change our children's health, and it could also increase markets and production, which is one of the food safety and security strategies that has been identified by our Department of Agriculture. So I would just like to briefly point out a report that has just come out. In fact, I really only received this report 2 days ago. I had received drafts of this report, but this is the final report. So this is a report. It's a 3-volume series. It was created by our Office of Planning in conjunction with our Department of Agriculture to make recommendations for increased food security and food self-sufficiency strategies for Hawaii. And it also points to recommendations in bills and legislation, and also it points out in the strategy a lot of parts of the strategy that seem to be missing from Hawaii. So I want to go back for a second and just talk about the governor's New Day plan for agriculture, which was the renaissance of agriculture in Hawaii. Because all of these things that I have just talked about, increasing children's health, increasing markets and production for our farmers, this is all outlined in the governor's New Day plan. And one of the things I know that the governor has been very interested in, and it's called for in this report, is that there be interagency strategic planning for agriculture in the state of Hawaii. And I don't think this is something that has been done in Hawaii before, but everyone has their own interests. Department of Ag has interests in increasing production and markets. Department of Health has big interests in increasing children's health today. The University of Hawaii at Manoa has interest in increasing farmers, and so on. And so this plan does say that there is what is missing is this interagency strategic planning for an overall policy in Hawaii for increased food security and food self-sufficiency strategies. So I'm not certainly going to go through these recommendations for legislation. This is something that you can all see for yourself. But I would really encourage you to get these 3 volumes from our Office of Planning and take a look at some of the recommendations that they're making for this session in order to really balance agriculture in Hawaii so that we can be supporting increased farmers, increasing our workforce, agricultural education from K through 16, creating a farm-to-school program that would increase markets, and also improve our local lunch for our children eventually. As we grow more farmers and we're able to procure local foods for our lunch programs, this will help to increase our children's health as they are eating more fresh fruits and vegetables that are grown locally and not, coming from the mainland in cold storage for 3 to 4 weeks. So thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to just speak briefly today about a bigger picture of agriculture for the state of Hawaii, and thank you so much for coming today.
Okay, all right. Andrew, I'm going to start with a question. I'm just curious, with your effort in California, what might be your advice as we move forward to try to have a real discussion and good policy actually pass?
Yeah, the experience in California, I was a co-author of Prop 37. I think we learned some lessons. One is we did a very extensive poll after the 51-49 loss, very narrow loss. We were outspent $50 million to about $6 million, $7 million, and in television ads 10 to 1. So that was difficult, but we still 51-49. But we took a poll, and here's some interesting figures from the poll, which is among African Americans in California, we won over 70% of the vote. Among Latinos in America, we won about 74% of the vote. And among Asian Americans, we won over 80% of the vote. We lost white educated women by 55-45. So that one of the reasons is because a lot of Monsanto's advertisement was going to that particular consumer group, what's sometimes derisively called the soccer moms, and that was somewhat effective. What I found so incredibly encouraging for somebody who has an office in California and works there is to see the breadth of the food movement. You know, sometimes we stereotype the food movement, and here we're looking at remarkable majorities among the African American population, and they were watching the same television. They were being inundated with the same ads. And yet here they were showing up in 70s and 80 percentiles. So I think it's a really encouraging moment for us. And I also think that on Election Day, well, we know that on Election Day, we actually won the vote. The people that voted on Election Day actually voted for labeling. It was the fact that Monsanto and the others were able to dominate the waves during the early election time before we could get on the air. That's where we lost that narrow margin. But actually for the people who voted on Election Day, because we were able to get on TV the last week, the proposition won. We also spent a good deal of time and money afterwards to figure out, as Paul was saying, what did a lot of the no people think? Why did they vote no? And we found that over 40% of the people that voted no support mandatory labeling. They had just been convinced by the ads that there was something wrong with the bill. It was going to be good for trial lawyers. It was going to hurt, businesses in some fashion. So they just fell for those $50 million of ads. But they supported, and not a single bill from the other side, and this is sort of interesting, said we shouldn't label. There's not a single bill that said labeling is wrong. They knew that that wasn't going to sell. The no side. So they just said there's something wrong with the bill, it's going to cost too much, not well written, which I took personally, and all sorts of stuff like that, So the take home is, if you add our 49% to the 40% that voted no, who said in a poll, and these are the voters, we only polled voters, that 40% of them said they wanted mandatory labeling. We're looking at about 70% of the people who actually voted who support mandatory labeling. So I think it's a matter of really just sticking to that right to know issue, and knowing that the vast majority supports you, and making one of the reasons I think Paul's bill is not just Paul's bill, the bill that's being introduced is a very effective bill, is because it eliminates virtually any of those kinds of misdirections, misinformation, miseducation that they can try and do because of the scope of the bill. It gets rid of a lot of the things that they were trying to say that our bill didn't have. I should also say, to second Paul on this, which is that right now 15 states, including California, have legislation. And I think Vermont, Connecticut, Washington, and because we now know that the vast majority of voters in California who voted want mandatory labeling, even California, one of those is going to pass. It is not at 51-49 when you outspend 10-1, is, we see the path to victory. So it's not a matter of if with labeling, it's a matter of when. And so again, to second what Paul was saying, if Hawaii can go first in this very narrow, limited way, it could both set a precedent, and also, if I was in the Chamber of Commerce of Hawaii, I would say what a fantastic public relations coup for Hawaii, saying that when you come to Hawaii, we let you know. You're right, when what we're producing Whole Foods, you'll know. So I think it actually, for a very narrow bill like this, it's a huge bang for the buck for Hawaii for this limited bill. So, but it really is just a matter of when, and as Paul said, I think these other bills will be even more extensive than this current bill in Hawaii. So it could be cheap grace for Hawaii as well to say, hey, we were the first to pass the labeling bill, but it wouldn't include the processed foods. So even though it was 51-49, I think that the silver lining is the wide expanse of the food movement, that it stretches much further than people have thought, that continue to show the vast majority of people want labeling. And I think that it shows with the enormous enthusiasm it's caused around the country, with 15 different states now having it, that it shows that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this is going to happen. And I think it's a great opportunity for Hawaii.
Is this on? I just had a quick question. Thank you so much for coming and sharing all of your information. I come from a farming family. My family has a small egg farm in Wahiawa. We're 103 years old. And so a lot of roots there, but just had a quick question as, say we get to pass this bill, that would be great. Do you plan to introduce more bills to continue to go for eggs? Would eggs now have to be labeled GMO? One of our biggest problems is feed prices here. There's no feed producer here. We're struggling as it is to just continue to hold on. Is this something that you see you'd continue?
Well, I can honestly just say that I haven't really thought of, how and when and under what circumstances I would personally be wanting to promote an expansion of this labeling requirement. My view is I would be thrilled if this bill passes. If there are, if several years from now there is a national sort of shift in the way that people approach this issue, and it becomes more commonplace that labeling is going to be required, so that in a sense the playing field is being leveled, and a lot of different producers are being subjected to a different sort of regime that is becoming widespread, then I think, yeah, it might be appropriate to look at having that include Hawaii. But I can say that I personally am not thinking, gee, if only I could do this, then next year it's that. It's just not on my agenda.
I have a quick answer to that too, which is that every bill out there, and my organization created the model state legislation that's in these 15 different states. None of them goes beyond Europe. And just to be clear, because it may not be clear to people, but the European Union and its labeling of, and by the way, 60 countries have mandatory labeling of GMOs, 60. All of Europe, Japan, Australia, Korea, Africa, Brazil. I mean, we are we're lagging behind the rest of the world here. China, shouldn't forget to mention China. So that's 60 countries. None of the countries I'm aware of requires the labeling of meat or poultry or eggs where they've been fed GE food. So I think that to directly, whether they should or not is another question, but they don't. Prop 37, that was an exemption. It's an exemption in every one of the state bills. We don't want to go beyond where Europe has gone and the other countries. We just want to be the same as them. So at this point, not a single bill that I know of or any single country that I know of actually says you need to label eggs that were from chickens that were fed GMO varieties. Unless the chickens themselves were genetically engineered, and we don't have that, thank goodness, at this point. And to be clear, what we're really talking about is a small universe. Corn, soy, cotton, canola, sugar beets, and I think very temporarily a small amount of alfalfa because of the great work that a couple of us are trying to do here. So that's it. That's the universe. Salmon may show up, but that's a whole other question. I don't think that's going to go anywhere. But that's the universe of what we're talking about, of genetically engineered crops. So that's the only thing we'll be dealing with. So I don't think that that's going to be a concern for your family.
Thank you.
So I'd just like to add that thank you for bringing that up, because you're not the only one who is having that kind of problem. I mean, across our state, our small animal producers have closed. And I see Governor Waihee nodding his head. I mean, not only our egg producers, but our pork producers and our chicken producers and everyone else. And the reason is the high cost of transportation of feed. As the price of oil rises, so does the price of feed in Hawaii, and it's really priced our farmers right out of the market. So, I think this is a perfect opportunity to again look at our self-sufficiency food strategy for Hawaii and call upon the University of Hawaii or the Pacific Basin Agricultural Research Center, our ARS research centers in Hawaii, or whoever can do this research, and really reorient us to what we always used to do, which was we used to figure out how to feed our animals without importing feed. Whether it's turning the cows out after they've been on grass into the pigeon pea, which is what they used to do in the early 1920s, or using the the Kiawe beans, which is another thing they used to do on Hawaii Island to fatten the cows before. So there are all kinds of feed strategies. And if we could have more research dollars actually put into farming research here today, we could learn how to be more self-sufficient in both fertilizers, fertility, and our feeds, and we could start moving in this other direction. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned the list of crops that are GMO, but Hawaii is a little bit different in that the crops that you mentioned, I'm going to talk, that they have, a lot of the GMO is it's almost like cosmetic modifications, so that they can be Roundup ready, and it makes it easier for the farmers to grow them. But in Hawaii, because we have a year-round growing season, we've had a couple crops that have been susceptible to virus, and the big one is papaya. And then also the banana, where they're trying to find something that can deal with the bunchy top that's spread through aphids. So we do have a fairly large crop here, both for local production and for export, that many of our small farmers that have made it are made at selling the GMO papaya. And then if they can't find a biological control for the bunchy top, they may start to take a look at GMO for something along those lines. And I guess what I'm asking is, how, if you guys have looked through how that's going to impact farmers, for direct food crops, and what positions are on the GMO that's kind of non-cosmetic, but more dealing with the viruses that may be taking down certain crops in certain areas.
Well, one of the things I mentioned, I'm not sure if it was before you entered the room, but as you know, our papaya farmers already export genetically engineered papayas to Japan, and they are labeled as such. So what this bill would require is simply giving local residents the same right to information that these farmers are happy to give to people in Japan. Is it possible that as a result of labeling, there will be changes to profits of some of our papaya growers? Yes, I can't deny that that is a possibility. I think the question is it fair that the fear of that occurring should be borne by consumers being kept in the dark? I think that if people are persuaded by evidence, facts, that there is no reason to avoid a particular product, then they will not over time. And if labeling something as genetically engineered over time, people look at it and they say, so what? I don't care, that's fine. Then that's fine with me too. People can make up their own minds. But I think that what this bill does is say, give people the right to decide, give them facts, and then the market will adjust to the realities rather than people's fears, if they are irrational, or misconceptions or misleading information or so forth. I don't really see any other solution that I think is really fair. That's where I come down on it.
Yeah, I think it's important, and it's often not understood. How do you genetically engineer something? What actually happens? And the fact of the matter is that you have to get foreign DNA into the nucleus of the cell of that particular plant. And so in every genetically engineered plant, whether it be a virus-resistant plant, whether it be a herbicide-tolerant or a BT plant, you have the genetic construct you want to get in there. You attach it to a bacterium vector. In this case, it's a tumefaciens. It's a bacteria that causes tumors in plants. That then carries it into the nucleus. It invades the nucleus. Then all of them have a cauliflower mosaic virus, which stimulates the growth of the protein that you want, whether it be antivirus or whether it be bacterial. And then most of them have something called an antibiotic marker system, so they can see whether it got in there, and that's usually something that responds to kanamycin or ampicillin. So there really is no cosmetic genetic engineering. You know, it's every genetically engineered plant has this cassette, which is the word they use, of the gene you want in there, the DNA you want in there, the vector that gets it in there, the promoter, viral promoter that promotes it once it's in there, and the antibiotic marker system that checks whether it's actually in there or not. That's the cassette, and that's in every cell of the plant. Now, people disagree whether that is more dangerous or whether each of those elements creates a problem or not, but we should be aware that this is a wholly new creature that we're creating that has novel DNA, novel viruses, bacteria that's never been seen before. Does not mean, as I said before, that we have to say that all biotechnology is bad or should be stopped or we should stop research. I don't think we should stop research. I think it's important. However, we do have to be aware of simple biology 01. And that's what I maybe tried to say before. If you spray enough Roundup on weeds, the weeds will become resistant. Same with 2,4-D, same with dicamba. This is biology 01. It's adaptation or adaption. That's what it is. The same is true with viruses. You are antibiotics in human beings. If you do enough of trying to get around the virus will get around you. We will not defeat viruses with biotechnology. We may have a temporary fix, but the viruses, and it's already happening with papaya, will evolve to avoid that. And the idea that we're going to be so clever to biotech, and by the way, as you know, it was sort of an accident that they found the papaya thing. Anyways, good accident. But the idea that we're going to be clever enough to outsmart all these viruses and try and genetically engineer them, rather than look to the underlying causes that might be creating virus contamination, maybe more of a factory farming situation for that crop than a more local, and look to the root causes of why we have these diseases, whether it be in plants or in animals and factory farms. It seems to me it's a panacea, and maybe a useful one for a period of time, but not a long-term solution to those problems, because those viruses, will adapt. Again, I'm not saying, and again, we get this in the United States all the time. I hear it from Monsanto whenever I talk with them, and they say, oh, everyone is labeling around the world. It's terrible. And whether you agree with that or not, they are labeling it, and so that was the problem with papaya. As you know, it was devastating. Instead of saving the papaya farmers, that technology, it created a huge, huge problem because they couldn't sell to Japan. It took them almost 5 years to be able to get that labeling to Japan. So it can also mean international rejection of your crop, and that's why one of the reasons, not just the brilliant lawyers that have stopped wheat and rice and biopharmaceuticals and bent grain, is also the fact that these some of the major industries said, we don't want this GMO because it'll stop our exports. So export market is also another critical thing for, if you have a GMO crop, will you be able to export it, and what effect will that have on your farmers? So that's another wild card to throw into the discussion.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yeah, and just to add one thought to that, yeah, the issue of cross-pollination or contamination of non-GMO crops isn't something that we focused on, but it is, in fact, a major issue. Andy was talking about rice. Conventional long-grain rice farmers essentially lost roughly $1 billion as a result of having their inventories contaminated with minute amounts of a genetically engineered strain. Immediately, the European Union and the Japanese markets shut overnight. And these farmers, the rice farmers, have been in litigation over this for the last 5 years or so, and court awards are already, and settlements are hundreds of millions of dollars already. So this isn't speculation. And there have been other similar instances. Starlink corn is another one. Hundreds of millions of dollars of lost of costs because simply of contamination. In Hawaii with papaya, I think one of the problems that we see is that if papaya grows everywhere, grows in my backyard, I don't know how it got there, and yet you don't know unless you literally test it, which practically nobody does or even knows how or where to get those tests, okay? You don't know whether the papaya growing in your yard is genetically engineered or not, because you don't know how the seed got there. Chances are very good that someone bought a genetically engineered papaya at the supermarket, and they threw the seeds into compost, and that went here and that went there, or a bird ate it and dropped it half a mile away. And so nobody knows. And if you are trying to grow papaya that you don't want to be genetically engineered, whether you want to grow it organically or you just want to grow it conventionally but not genetically engineered, you are constantly have to be concerned that pollen is going to drift onto your fields. And so all of the burden is being put on the non-GMO grower to somehow prevent this invisible force from contaminating their crop and putting, if you're an organic farmer, putting your markets at risk. It seems to me that the fair solution to this is transparency and information. And then people who want the benefit of growing a genetically engineered crop for whatever reason, let them bear also the burden of letting people know so that other people can take appropriate measures and so forth.
Has anybody looked closely at the market in Japan and what the effect has been since they've allowed the GMO labeled papaya into the country?
I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, you want to take just a minute if you don't mind? If you know. Thank you.
That's a great question. Aloha, my name is Juanita Kawamoto, and I'm with the Environmental Caucus of the Democratic Party of Hawaii. I would just also like to add that in 2012, the Convention for the Democratic Party passed a resolution to support GMO labeling. That means over 60,000 Democrats under the Party of Hawaii will be supporting GMO labeling because it is part of our resolution. Therefore, our caucuses will come out and speak on this. And so we hope to be here and testify based on, thank you, legislators, for allowing us to have this kind of awareness. But the answer to your question is, Dr. Sabri Shihata of UH Hilo did an extensive study that he was requested regarding Japan's impact from the papaya industry. And what it was discovered was that it was more looked at as a seasonal product. So how it came out was during Christmas time, Japanese were buying the GMO papaya as a gift. But after Christmas time, it dropped dramatically as far as the impact. So there is a study with Dr. Sabri Shihata of UH Hilo, agribusiness economist there and was a dean. He's passed on since then, but his information is still a part of the system. And if you need that, I can help you with that. So they showed a very extensive study of how GMO papaya actually had an impact.
Thank you.
No, but I have a little information on that. So. There was an article in the Hilo paper just last week about Japan's GMO papaya acceptance. It was on this exact subject. And last year we shipped 1 million pounds of non-GMO papaya to Japan, and we shipped about 4,000 pounds of labeled GMO papaya to Japan. So the consumer acceptance there has been very, very minimal, and they're working on ramping up their marketing campaign to get people to accept it in different ways. But the fact is, labeling has done what everyone thought labeling would do, is people are going to choose the other. So Japan took 10 years to accept Hawaiian papaya, and they required labeling, and it took a massive campaign from Hawaiian papaya industry to get them to accept it, and still it's been less than 1% of their papaya.
Can I make a brief comment on that, which is that, is this thing working now? Yes. In 30 years of research and untold hundreds of millions of dollars of private and public monies, the biotechnology industry has yet to put out a single product that does anything for the consumer. No less cost, no less fat, no more nutrition, no more taste, no more shelf life. Zero. Zilch. Nada. Yes, it helps, the vast majority of it does help large farmers more easily spray their herbicides, we know that. And there can be advantages to farmers who are suffering from in smaller areas by a virus. But as far as the consumer is concerned, nothing. That is a tremendous market problem for them, because they don't offer the consumer anything. They'll say, here's potato chips with no fat, here's coffee with no caffeine, and it's all done. They haven't been able to do that. So one of the reasons they oppose labeling is because they offer the consumer nothing but potential risk. There can be debate about that risk, and there is debate about that risk, but there's no debate about the benefit. There is none. So any rational consumer who goes into the supermarket and sees two products, one that is non-GMO, same price, and one that is GMO, looks at the GMO and says, this offers me no advantages, only potential risk. And probably will go with the non-GMO variety, because why wouldn't they? They're a rational consumer. So that is not a failure. That's not our problem. That's not the problem of transparency. That's not the problem of labeling. That's their problem. Those who are pushing this technology, then they should do the kind of research that might benefit the consumer. And believe me, if they did that, if they had, fat-free bacon, or tomatoes that actually tasted like tomatoes, they would advertise the heck out of it, and they wouldn't be afraid of labeling. One of the reasons they're afraid of labeling is because they have nothing to offer the consumer except potential risk. It's their dirty little secret, and it's one of the reasons they don't want labeling. But that's not the problem. We should still have transparency. It's up to them to do the kind of research, and goodness knows they have the money, to try and do something that actually helps us, that actually makes us. No one gets up in the morning wanting to buy a GE food. Nobody on earth. That's their marketing problem. That shouldn't be our problem, therefore we can't label it. We should still label it, and then they can deal with the market as they should have to. So the market will decide.
Say the market can only work if people have information. It doesn't work, it's skewed if people are kept in the dark. The best solutions to problems will emerge from market-driven research. If you're creating a product that creates a short-term fix for only one part of the population at the expense of another part of the population, and you're not creating any market incentives to create a solution that benefits a larger part of the population, then our economic system just isn't working the way it's supposed to work. And I think that's the situation we're in now. I think if we have more information out there that creates economic incentives through people using their dollars the way they choose to based on good information, then the best solutions will emerge. Otherwise, they won't.
Thank you. I failed to introduce myself before. I'm new Senator Russell Ruderman. I wanted to mention a couple of GMO-related bills that my office is introducing. I was really excited to hear about the one that Paul talked about. And I hope that some folks who are involved will support ours also. We also tried to craft some very narrowly defined bills for the same reasons, I think, because maybe it will get through. I'm introducing one bill that says that no new GMO species can be introduced to the state of Hawaii, even if it's for experimentation purposes, without a permit process that requires a public hearing. So it doesn't take away anything from what's happening right now with corn and soy and any research that's being done. It doesn't take $1 of income away from any farmer in the state, but it does protect all the rest of our existing crops from some future contamination. I'm also introducing a bill that will hopefully have some sort of taxation on the GMO seed crop exports, which are currently exempt from taxation, even though they're our most valuable, supposedly agricultural product, and they give no benefit to the people of Hawaii. So I want to at least capture some of the tax base that they're getting away with. So I hope that you folks will help support those bills, or all these bills, as they move through the House and the Senate. I'm also introducing several bills that are just tangentially related on the subject of food security and food self-sufficiency. A bill to allow a farmer to sell any product directly to a consumer, no matter what it is, without regulation. Another bill to allow raw milk, and a couple other food-related bills to try to empower the small farmer, because what's coming down the line with the Federal Food Modernization Act is a system of rules that's going to greatly harm small farmers
And I believe it's not designed with food safety in mind. It's designed to protect large agribusinesses from competition from small farmers. So we're trying to protect the right of people to buy from their local farmers. And one other thing that was touched on earlier regarding the papaya, you know, if we put the same amount of our University of Hawaii research efforts into solving our agricultural products through organic or natural means, we would also have found a solution to ring spot virus and whatever else is coming down the line. It's not necessary that we turn to a non-natural biotechnology solution. We ought to give at least equal, if not greater, support to natural or organic solutions to our farming. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Russell, for bringing that up. I want to just tell a little story about a conversation that I once had with Richard Manshart, you know, who was one of our scientists who genetically engineered the papaya. And he brought up an article that was in the journal, a peer-reviewed Journal of Microbiology, that did a study showing that if you just added soil to the hull of a papaya, it actually greatly increased the immune system of the papaya, and it could ward off ring spot virus. And so, you know, in Puna, our papayas are grown in high heat situations with up, you know, hundreds of inches of rain and rock, basically. So, you know, it's true. If we could find another solution, if we looked for it, we could find a safe solution to growing our papayas safely in Hawaii.
Mahalo. And we are already over the 11:30 goal, but I'm sure we could continue this conversation for quite some time, and I look forward to it because we will be talking about it this session. I'd like to wrap up and thank everybody for coming. I think that, you know, whether we can get legislation out this session depends on you, the public, and whether you guys can come out and show that we need a change. And that means that all the different advocacy groups, whether it be for children or organic farming or environmentalists, Democratic Party, whatever it may be, it's time to get active and come let the legislators know what you're concerned about. And this issue in particular, it's really going to be the only way I think we can make a difference.